Grandpa Bill. In case you don't know, that's going to happen actually in September for the first time, which is pretty cool. Hey, a lot of these songs we just sang, talk about. They talked about the core Christian symbol. Okay, what is the core Christian symbol? A cross, right? And it's kind of strange to think of a cross because of what it is actually as the symbol of peace and right oneness with God again and all this kind of stuff, because it was an instrument of brutal execution. I mean, it was like having an electric chair up there or something like that, and wear that around your neck, right? But the cross is the core symbol of the Christian faith for two reasons, really. First of all, Christ's cross is the source of our forgiveness and the peace that we enjoy with God, and it's supposed to spill over in our relationships with others, no matter where they're coming from, by the way. And like the Apostle Paul wrote, he said, "For God in his fullness was pleased to live in Christ, and through him he reconciled everything to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross." Okay, now that's a whole conversation we could have that we're not going to have today about the blood, but that's Christ's cross. And then the other thing that happened was Jesus made the cross the centerpiece of a Christ follower, somebody that claims the name of Christ, of their lifestyle, really. And he said, it's important to understand that. He said, you cannot be my disciple unless you carry your own cross and follow me. Now, I know some of you are thinking, I've been married to this guy for this long, and I've been bearing this cross for quite a while. And that's not what he's talking about, okay? And another time he said this, he says, I'm going to suffer many terrible things, and we've been looking at this. I'm going to be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, the teachers of the religious law. I will be killed, but on the third day I will rise again. And then he said to the crowd, after he said that, he said, if any of you want to be my follower, he said it again, you must give up your own way and take up your own cross. And then he made it daily. This is like a daily thing. That's the hardest part of this. And then you follow me, okay? He says, if you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And so today, Jesus' main concern is that people who claim his name become people of the cross. Now, I'll be honest with you, in our culture, in our world today, in popular understandings, a lot of this is lost. Okay? There's this idea out there that we're going to weaponize Jesus so we can get our way, so we can get the wrong people out, and all this kind of stuff. What ends up happening is Christ followers become not known for what they're willing to sacrifice for, but instead who and what they're against. And that's not the way of the cross. Okay, it's really not. You see, becoming a person of the cross is not about wearing a cross around your neck. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure a lot of you have them right now. Okay, it's not about what's on the bumper of your car. Okay, it's not about what's on your T-shirt. It's not about your image. It's not about the way you're branding yourself out there. Okay, it's a kind. What it means is it's kind of death to self. It's this idea of sacrificing for the sake of another person. His concern is the self-giving, self-sacrificial love that is supremely expressed on the cross become part of our lifestyle and our actions in the world. In this room, on the job site, if you're in a boardroom, a classroom, wherever you are, that you bring that with you, that you and I become men and women of the cross. And Jesus, these are some of the most sobering words in some ways ever recorded in human history, and also the most transformative. These words have changed a lot of people's lives throughout world history. If anyone would follow me, they must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me, choosing to become that person that's willing to do that. Now, we've been exploring Jesus' journey to the cross the last couple weeks. 2 weeks ago, we looked at Jesus, how it began in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus knew what was coming. And he was feeling extremely lonely. His friends wouldn't even stay up with him. But because he knew what he was coming, he experienced just great emotional pain. And he tried to even negotiate his way out. If possible, let me not do this. And then we saw Jesus betrayed by somebody that he had traveled with for the last 3 years. Somebody he had poured his life into, a guy named Judas. And Judas was the one that, with a kiss, betrayed Jesus. Now you might wonder, why did he have to point him out and stuff? Well, they didn't have TV back then. They didn't have newspapers. You didn't see pictures of Jesus all the time in the news or something like that. He had to be pointed out because he was just like everybody else, okay? And then we saw him condemned by this religious, quasi-religious governing body of the nation. And he went from being a hero on Palm Sunday, what we celebrate as Palm Sunday, coming into Jerusalem. They thought he was going to go kick out the Romans, use his rhetoric and his oratory and his miraculous powers, and establish himself as a physical king in Jerusalem. And when it became clear he wasn't going to do that, he went to being a zero. And people will sometimes, they'll be against you sometimes if you're going to walk this way of the cross. And then we saw him denied by one of his best friends, this guy named Peter. Okay, who said, "I'll never leave you, no matter what happens to you." And his friend, when it got called out, he finally said, with profanity, okay, he said, "I don't even know the guy. What are you talking about?" So we saw in those first 4 vignettes, we'll call them stations of the cross, what was we saw that sometimes people will let you down. It can be a very lonely thing. But here's the thing, God will never let you down. Sometimes you feel alone, okay? And it just really feels like Jesus is going to say on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Life gets like that sometimes. And the truth is, even though it feels like he's abandoned you, he's always with you. He just really is, okay? He's an ever-present help in time of need. Then last week we saw that cross-bearing sometimes requires us to go against our natural tendencies, to choose a harder path rather than an easier path in life. We saw Jesus get judged by this guy named Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate did not want to send Jesus to the cross. Okay, he kept giving Jesus outs, and Jesus refused to take the outs. He refused his rights. He didn't demand his rights like we tend to do. He instead refused his rights for the sake of others. And the reason he did it in the big picture is so that we could be a part of his kingdom that he was going to establish. He said a kingdom that's not of this world. And it's our duty to align ourselves with that. That's why he taught us to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." In other words, it's our duty as people of the cross to bring his values down here and to release them out into this world. And then we saw Jesus get scourged and brutally mocked, and he restrained his ability. We talked about how if it had been you or me, okay, we would have sent bolts of lightning down, right? These guys that are beating him and all this kind of stuff. Jesus appeared weak in that moment, but the reality is he wasn't expressing weakness. We talked about meekness, which is strength under control. He restrained himself so that we could be a part of his kingdom, because he needed to go to the cross to do what he was going to do for our benefit and for the benefit of everybody in the world. And then finally we saw last week that he bore the cross. He picked it up. It seemed that it was the rejection of others that forced Jesus to pick up that cross. But here's the thing. He willfully went that path. He did it. He chose that path. He rejected the outs. He chose the fatal path. He refused his rights. He restrained his abilities. And he gave his physical life. He bore that cross on our behalf so that we could be a part of his kingdom, a kingdom that transcends all the kings of this earth, and that we can now align ourselves with the values of that kingdom and pray that prayer sincerely. God, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, okay? So today, we're going to meet some of the people that he met along the way. And as we look at some of the people he met along the way, we're going to see that he kind of ended up with some interesting bedfellows, okay? And bearing, the cross does that to us sometimes. But here's the thing we're going to see, is even in his distress, he did not stop helping other people. Now, am I the only one that if I'm going through a really hard time, am I the only one that tends to circle the wagons, and worry more about myself than what's going on in other people's lives? Am I the only one? No. Okay, I'm looking for a response because I'm feeling a little insecure up here. Okay. We can even feel sorry for ourselves, right? And he didn't do that. Even after the stress of Gethsemane, the abandonment by the crowds, the betrayals and the denials of his friends, the injustice of the legal system, being flogged, beaten, and mocked, okay, suffering and stumbling, bearing the weight of that cross, Jesus still noticed and tended to the people that he met along the way. So the eighth station or scene of the cross is this guy named Simon of Cyrene helping Jesus, okay? And he didn't volunteer for the job. He was forced into it. But in the end, we're going to see that Jesus helps Simon, even though it doesn't look like it initially, okay? It says this, and as they led Jesus away, a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, happened to be coming in from the countryside. The soldiers seized him and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus, okay? Now, there's a lot to unpack in those two short little sentences. So there's a few interesting things. First is this. Simon was an African. Okay, he was from the city called Cyrene, which is in modern-day Libya. Okay, and I think that's quite notable. Okay, that there was a sizable Jewish population there at that time, but it's uncertain where he was coming from, whether he was from the Jewish faith or from outside of it, because the name Simon went both ways. It was just a common name, but it's notable, I think, that a foreign man, okay, somebody from Africa, served Jesus in his final hour. Another interesting thing about this guy is that he modeled for us Jesus' teaching on cross-bearing when we carry our cross, okay? Multiple times Jesus said, we bear our cross, okay? And then there's this detail in the story that says the soldiers seized him and put the cross on him, and what was he made to do? Carry it behind Jesus. He's literally carrying a cross and following Jesus for this stretch of the journey, okay? And he literally did that. And so Simon created this picture of what cross-bearing actually looks like. And another thing is the suddenness and the unexpectedness of being enlisted to do this, okay, to bear this burden. Simon didn't see this coming. He was just minding his own business, going down the road. It says that he happened to be coming in from the countryside, and the soldiers seized him and put the cross on him, okay? And suddenly this heavy burden was unexpectedly placed upon him, and he was forced to carry it. Now, life is like that sometimes, huh? Yes. Doesn't that happen? Suddenly a heavy burden is placed unexpectedly on us, and we are forced to carry it, okay? Just a week ago, over on Colgrade Road, you probably heard about this near the library. Sharon and I were driving home, and we were probably the third car on the scene of this accident that happened there. And I was with two of the people died, okay? This couple was driving home to Encinitas, okay? And I was with the man, okay, while his wife was dying on the other side of the vehicle. And they were just minding their own business, driving down the road, and this car in the opposing lane crossed over. It could happen to any of us, and it was a full-on hit. He died, and the wife died, foisting upon this guy named Jim a life-altering burden. And he was badly, grievously wounded as well. And I have a friend who he texted me yesterday morning that his dad, just about a month ago, was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I visited him several times, and wonderful man, and he's come to faith. And my friend texted me yesterday morning and said, hey, I want you to know, thanks for all you did. My dad passed in the night. And these things just happen to us, right? Yes. You know, and so this happens. Jesus bore the cross, but here's the thing, this is what he's talking about more specifically, because that's just life in our world where these things come upon us. But he's saying sometimes we choose the harder path. We carry a burden. We volunteer to carry that burden, and so that we can sacrificially help another person. Cross-bearing is a centerpiece of a Christ follower's life. And they seized Simon, they put the cross on him, and he made him carry it. Now another thing is about Simon is, don't worry, we're not going to spend as much time on the other ones, okay? We're just going to talk about Simon here mostly. Why did the soldiers force Simon to help Jesus, okay? That's a good question. They forced him. The soldiers had given Jesus the beatings, right? They put that crown on him, that painful crown of thorns, the robe, the mocking. But here's the thing, what were their orders? Their orders was to go crucify him, okay? Which meant they might be in trouble, okay, if the abuse they put on Jesus, okay, kept them from fulfilling their order, okay? Their orders were to set an example of this guy of what would happen to those who challenged Roman rule. That they would die a slow, excruciating death. They were ordered to force him into that humiliating, torturous death with a sign above him that said, "This is the King of the Jews." Okay? And if they were likely motivated by their orders. If they didn't do the job, what would happen to them? Well, we don't know. It's an unspoken thing, okay? But here's the thing, most importantly, that was the plan of God. Evidently, Jesus was in such a debilitated state, at least in part of that journey, that he needed some help. Otherwise, he was going to die on the side of the road from all the abuse they had given him, rather than from actually being put on the cross. So in the plan of God, Simon was a part of that. And then one last thing about Simon was forced to help Jesus, but there's evidence that in the end, Jesus helped Simon, okay? Mark's account of the same thing reads like this. A passerby named Simon, who was from Cyrene, was coming in from the countryside, and just then the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. And then Mark says Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus. By the way, what he's doing is he's telling the early church, hey, you guys know Alexander and Rufus? Okay, which they did. They were well known. Well, this was their dad. Now, why does Mark mention Simon's sons? Well, his sons must have been known to the early church, which suggests that this experience resulted in Simon and his entire family of coming to faith, and that he had the privilege of helping Jesus get to that place where that salvation could happen. Simon saves Jesus' life so he can make it to the cross. And the evidence indicates that on the cross, Jesus saved Simon and his kids on the cross. Isn't that cool? I mean, that's the evidence, okay? Next, Jesus meets a group of women who are grieving over his predicament. And it says, a large crowd trailed behind, including many grief-stricken women. But Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and your children, for the days are coming when they will say, 'Fortunate indeed are the women who are childless, the wombs that have not borne a child, and the breasts that have never nursed.' People will beg the mountains, fall on us, plead with the hills, bury us. For if these things are done when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" Now, so a large group of people trailed behind, including these grief-stricken women. And what that indicates is that not everyone became disloyal to him. He still had a following, people who were really messed up by what was happening to him. And Jesus turned and he said to them, "Hey, daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves and your children." And what he's doing is he's speaking to these distraught women, and he's asking them to feel worse for themselves than for him. Now, I'm sure that confused them, But he gives them this prophetic prediction then. He says this, "For the days are coming when they will say, 'Fortunate are the women who are childless and that never bore a child, never nursed a child.'" And see, childless mothers in this culture were considered to be very unfortunate, okay? But he predicts a time is coming of trouble and of judgment that the childless will be considered fortunate because they don't have to witness the sufferings of their children. There's nothing worse to a parent, right, than watching the suffering of their child. And in the midst of the suffering and pain, he warns that a time will come that will be so intense that they're going to wish for death. They're going to beg the mountains to fall on us and bury us and plead with the hills, cover us. And then he says this weird thing about the green, okay, which is what? How many of you have done a burn pile this year? Green is not easy to burn, right? Dry is easy to burn, right? Well, the green represents the innocent, righteous Jesus who they're putting to death, okay? The dry represents the guilty nation that's doing this. What he's predicting is, and this actually happened in AD 70, the destruction of the temple, and that this destruction was going to come upon the city. And so it's a weird little, it's really his last teaching that he did before he died. And then finally, Jesus is partnered with a couple of guys who are meeting the same fate. It says that Jesus is crucified. It says 2 others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him, and when they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross. And the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. Now, I think it's really noteworthy that in all 4 accounts of Jesus' life, this is spoken of, okay, the crucifixion of Jesus, and they're all spoken of in a similar way. It's short, perfunctory, and to the point. There's no embellishment. There's no details. There's no saying they spread his arm and they drove the nail, and it's just he was nailed to the cross, okay? That's all they simply say. And yet that action, okay, becomes the source of forgiveness and peace for us. For God in all his fullness was pleased to live in Christ, and through him reconcile everything to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Jesus' death on the cross, his blood on the cross. And this becomes the centerpiece of Christ's followers' life. You cannot be my disciple unless you're willing to sacrifice for other people. Pay that forward. So he experienced all the stress, the feelings of abandonment, the betrayals, the denials, the injustice, the floggings, the beatings, all the pain, the suffering and stumbling under the weight of it, and yet Jesus still took the time to talk to other people. We're going to see next week, okay, that his attentiveness continues even as he hung from the nails in his feet and in his wrists. And we're going to see him interact with the thieves. He's going to interact with the soldiers that crucified him. He's going to interact with his mother, okay? But today, the thing I wanted to just point out to you during this season, okay, as we get to this Easter season, is Jesus' main concern is that we become people of the cross. The idea is really simple. He did it for you and me, okay? And then we're willing to, he's counting on us to pay it forward. That's the idea. He's counting on us. The idea is really simple. It's our duty not to align with the values of the world, not to align with the values of our government. That is whatever country you live in, that's secondary. Okay? There's something bigger that you're a part of. There's something way more important. It's eternal. It's transformative in the lives, I hope in your life and in the lives of others. And it's our duty to align with that kingdom, to pray, Lord, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You did it for me, okay? Let me pay it forward to other people. Before we leave, I would like to ask you to lower your heads. And like to give you an opportunity to express yourself as I pray. to your personal need for the cross. Lord, I acknowledge the fact that I'm messed up. I'm sinful. And Jesus, I thank you for your incredible sacrifice for me on the cross. I need what you did for me. It was my waywardness that put you there. It was also your love and your desire that put you there. But Lord, with gratefulness and with happiness, I accept the gift of forgiveness. Teach me how to live a life that's worthy of your gift. You did it for me. Make me willing to pay it forward. It's in your name we pray. Amen.